Everyone in the Obsidian Amphitheater believed the same thing. The human would be dead before his name was even remembered. And yet, the way he looked at the alien monarch standing above him made people uneasy. Not afraid. Not angry. Amused. Because when Empress Kalira of the Aurelian Star Dominion announced her infamous oath, "If any human defeats me in single combat, I will bind myself to him," it was meant as humiliation. A cosmic joke. A challenge designed to never be met. She had crushed warlords older than human civilization. Her blades sang with star plasma. Her victories were written across 1,000 conquered systems. So when a lone Terran engineer named Elias Rook stepped into her sacred ring, the court laughed. They wouldn't be laughing for long. The arena was carved into the heart of a floating citadel orbiting a dying blue star. Millions watched across the Aurelian holonet. Nobles, generals, slave kings, all tuning in for what they assumed would be a massacre. HFY sci-fi tales often begin with hopeless odds. This one began with a human adjusting a frayed wrist strap. Elias didn't bow. That alone sent a ripple through the gallery. Kalira's eyes narrowed. Luminous silver pupils traced him like a predator, sizing up a wounded animal. Her armor shimmered in layered cerulean plates, each etched with kill runes from forgotten wars. "Terran," she said, her voice amplified by psychic resonance rather than speakers. "Do you understand the terms of this farce you've entered?" Elias lifted his chin. "I understand you think this is a spectacle," he replied calmly. "I understand you expect me to bleed for your amusement. And I understand you don't know what humans do when they have nothing left to lose." Murmurs rippled outward. She smiled slow, surgical. "Your kind builds machines. You survive because others fight for you." A flick of her wrist. The dual protocol flared to life. No shields. No interference. Only honor and death. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the microservos in his salvaged exo-rig hum under torn synth leather. It was a patchwork suit, scavenged from battlefield debris, repaired in mining tunnels, never meant for royal arenas. "Hold on, before we get into the real stuff, I want to know, what are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments. Because what happened next defied everything the galaxy believed about humans." The gong resonated like a struck moon. Kalira moved first. She blurred. The air cracked as her blade carved toward Elias's neck. No flourish. No mercy. Just execution. But the human didn't block. He stepped into the swing. Gasps erupted. At the last possible millisecond, Elias pivoted, letting the plasma edge slice through empty air where his throat had been. The heat vaporized a strand of his hair. He smelled burned keratin. Still alive. Still standing. Her eyes flashed. Again she struck, a storm this time. 10 blows in less than a breath. Each one aimed to sever a limb or core organ. Her style was ancient, perfected over centuries of imperial conquest. And Elias was being driven backward. Metal screamed under each near miss. His exo-rig groaned. His boots skidded across the black glass arena floor. The nobles were already preparing to lose interest. Until Elias smiled. A small thing. Almost invisible. He stopped retreating. He lunged forward. Straight into her killing range. She didn't expect that. His fist crashed against the flat of her blade. Not to parry, but to anchor. Magnetic couplers flared to life, momentarily binding to her weapon's energy field. Her eyes widened for the first time in centuries. "What?" He twisted. The magnetic lock destabilized the blade's containment matrix for a fraction of a second. Just enough. The sword shrieked. A feedback pulse burst outward. Kalira was hurled backward in a spray of starfire, her armor flaring as it absorbed the blast. Silence fell across the amphitheater. The human stood alone at center ring, chest heaving, smoke curling from his gauntlet. HFY sci-fi tales always talk about ingenuity, about improvisation under fire, but no one had ever done this to her. Kalira rose slowly, disbelief burning hotter than any wound. "You planned that," she whispered. Elias wiped blood from his lip. "I didn't come to win on strength," he said. "I came to change the rules." The court leaned forward, because now, for the first time in living memory, the Empress was not in control, and she was smiling for an entirely different reason. The moment Empress Kalira tasted doubt, the galaxy held its breath. No one had ever forced her to rethink a duel. Not once in 3 centuries of unbroken rule. Yet there she stood, smoke curling off her gauntlet, staring at a human who refused to look impressed. Kalira circled him slowly now, abandoning the blinding rush that had defined her opening assault. Her every step was deliberate, predatory. She had learned something in that explosive exchange. This Terran was not reckless. He was prepared. Elias rolled his shoulder, the servos whining in protest. His suit was already flashing amber diagnostics across his retinal overlay. Heat buildup, structural fatigue, microfractures spreading along the left knee actuator. He had bought seconds, not safety. And she was adapting. You altered the blade's containment field, Kalira said. A crude magneto-resonant tether. Ingenious for your species. Her sword reformed in her hand, its plasma edge stabilizing with a hiss like an angry star. But you cannot repeat it. She lunged again, slower this time, but layered with feints. High cut, low sweep, thrust to the heart. Elias backpedaled, parrying with his forearm plate, each impact reverberating through his bones. He felt the crowd's mood shift from laughter to anxious curiosity. HFY Sci-Fi tales thrive in that moment, when the impossible begins to look merely unlikely. A shallow cut opened across his ribs. Blood soaked the inside of his suit. Pain sharpened his focus. Would he fall now? He didn't. Instead, he triggered the second phase of his plan. A faint whine rose beneath the clangor of steel and starfire. His exorig's dorsal vents irised open, venting superheated air. Not to cool, to mask. Kalira frowned. What is that noise? Elias didn't answer. He sprinted sideways, vaulting a fallen fragment of arena decor, forcing her to pivot. She followed easily. Too easily. The moment she leapt, he slammed his heel into the floor. The black glass arena plate cracked, releasing a cloud of nanodust, a dense, reflective particulate Elias had smuggled into his boot compartments. The dust bloomed into a shimmering fog. Kalira slashed through it and hissed in irritation. Her blade's photonic sensor scrambled, its edge refracting unpredictably. For half a second, her legendary weapon could not see. That half second saved Elias's life. He dove forward, shoulder first, colliding with her midair. The impact rattled her armor, sending them skidding across the arena floor in a tangled heap of limbs and fury. The amphitheater erupted. They rolled apart. Kalira rose first, fury etched across her flawless features. You dare blind me in my own hall. Elias staggered up, chest burning. I dare to survive. She attacked again, and this time he didn't try to meet her blade. He ran, straight toward the throne dais. The court gasped in outrage. The sacred steps were forbidden ground. No challenger had ever dared retreat toward the Empress's seat of power. Kalira chased, rage fueling her stride. You disgrace yourself, Terran. Elias vaulted the first step, then the second. Energy crackled behind him as her blade shaved stone into molten rivulets. At the third step, he pivoted, not to strike her, but the dais itself. He slammed his gauntlet into a crystal filigree etched with ancient imperial glyphs. The glyphs flared. Kalira froze mid-swing. No, she breathed, because Elias hadn't struck a symbol of decoration. He had struck the oath sigil, the very rune that encoded her vow, the legal psychic binding that declared her challenge across the empire. If a human ever defeats me. The sigil began to fracture, not physically, metaphysically. A shockwave rippled outward, unseen yet felt. The crowd fell silent as nobles clutched their temples, silent observers reeling from the sudden feedback. Elias stumbled back, stunned. What did I just trigger? Kalira stared at the glowing crack splitting the oath sigil. You have no idea, she whispered. The dual protocol flickered. Systems across the citadel began recalibrating, reading the fracture as an unresolved state. Not victory, not defeat. A paradox. The arena's boundary field dropped for a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, Elias realized something terrifying. The oath wasn't just symbolic. It was enforced by the Empire's ruling intelligence. And now it was unstable. Had he just broken the Empire itself? Kalira slowly turned back to him. no longer radiating regal contempt. Now she radiated something far more dangerous. Fear. You were supposed to fight me, she said softly. Not my throne. Elias swallowed, blood dripping from his fingertips onto sacred stone. Maybe that's the difference between us. You fight to rule. Humans fight systems that were never meant to change. Alarms began to murmur across the chamber, subsonic and ominous. The duel was no longer just about survival. It was about the legitimacy of an empress whose power was now, somehow, conditional. And every being in that hall could feel the universe holding its breath. The empire was not built to handle uncertainty. And in the silence after the oath sigil fractured, uncertainty flooded every circuit, every mind, every hidden protocol beneath the Aurelian throne. Kalira did not strike. That alone told Elias how deep the damage ran. The alarms that had begun as whispers now pulsed in slow, subterranean waves, vibrating through the amphitheater floor like the heartbeat of something colossal waking from a coma. Above them, the crystal spires of the citadel dimmed, their internal luminescence fluctuating between imperial blue and warning amber. The ruling intelligence, the sovereign codex, was recalculating. HFY sci-fi tales often glorify battlefields and heroics. But sometimes the real war begins inside systems no one was ever meant to touch. Terran, Kalira said at last, her voice stripped of ceremony. Step away from the sigil. Elias hesitated. His visor HUD was spitting cascading error messages as his suit struggled to process the energy field rippling outward from the fractured rune. What happens if I don't? Her jaw tightened. For 300 cycles, she said. The Codex has defined imperial legitimacy through ritual supremacy. Victory in this arena is not theater. It is law. It proves divine mandate. Elias felt a chill unrelated to blood loss. You're telling me the Empire runs on duels? I am telling you, she replied, that you have interrupted a legal theorem encoded into every sector of our dominion. The Codex pulsed again. This time the hollow banners above the court glitched, replacing Kalira's regal sigil with a spinning triglyph marked Challenge State Unresolved. The crowd erupted. Nobles shouted over each other. Military envoys barked into wrist combs. Entire dynasties realized their authority might evaporate if the throne itself lost legal coherence. Would the guards storm the arena now? They didn't, because they couldn't. The dual protocol was still active, and the Codex, in its inflexible devotion to tradition, had locked the entire chamber until resolution conditions were met. Elias laughed weakly, half in disbelief. So everyone's trapped in here because I punched your furniture? Kalira ignored the sarcasm. She took a step toward him, slower than any of her previous movements. This wasn't a predator's advance. This was a monarch approaching a loaded reactor. You are bleeding, she observed. Your hospitality is overwhelming. Another tremor rippled through the floor. Somewhere far below, Elias imagined continental-scale processors re-evaluating 3 centuries of governance. The Codex spoke, not aloud, inside every skull in the room. Challenge parameters deviate from historical precedent. Resolution protocol requires clarification. Kalira stiffened, eyes glazing faintly as the machine mind interfaced directly with her neural crown. Codex, she said aloud, her tone formal, stripped of emotion. Define deviation. Human challenger has not been defeated. Empress has not achieved supremacy. Oath sigil fracture creates binding ambiguity. Elias felt suddenly very small. You mean, he said quietly, this duel can't end the way it's supposed to. Correct. Kalira exhaled slowly. Her sword dimmed, retracting into a dormant state at her wrist. Around them, the amphitheater lights stabilized, but not to imperial blue. They settled into neutral white, a color never used during her reign. HFY sci-fi tales are filled with last stands, with humanity roaring defiance at the stars. But this moment was different. This was humanity forcing the universe to ask itself a question it had never prepared to answer. What are the resolution options? Kalira asked. The Codex paused. An eternity for a system designed to act in femtoseconds. There are 2. The crowd leaned in as one organism. Option 1. Empress terminates challenger by any means necessary. voiding deviation through absolute victory. Elias tensed. He was one command away from becoming a footnote. Option 2. Empress acknowledges challenger as legitimate CO supremacy candidate, activating binding oath parameters. Kalira's eyes snapped open. Define co-supremacy, she demanded. Challenger has satisfied criteria for disruptive parity. Traditional oath interpretation requires adaptive application. The court erupted again, this time not in outrage but raw panic. Adaptive, one noble screamed. There's no such thing as adaptive supremacy. Kalira turned back to Elias. Her face no longer held contempt. It held calculation. You didn't come here to kill me, she said slowly. You came to force my empire to see you. Elias swallowed. I came here because your fleets erased my home colony. Because your tax convoys stripped our survivors of oxygen rations in the name of imperial tribute. Her gaze faltered, just slightly. You came here to make me accountable. The codex pulsed brighter. Binding oath parameters ready for execution. Would she choose death or revolution? Kalira looked up at the cracked sigil, then at the millions watching across the stars. Finally, she deactivated her neural crown. A move no empress had ever made during challenge state. I will not kill him, she said. Not today. Not like this. The codex hesitated. Confirm deviation? She lifted her chin. I confirm. The chamber lights flared gold, the color of transition, and Elias realized with a sinking, electric certainty, he had not survived the duel. He had rewritten the throne. The empire did not rebel. It rebooted. The moment Kalira confirmed deviation, the amphitheater vanished. Not physically, perceptually. Elias's vision collapsed inward, as if someone had closed the universe around his skull. The roar of the crowd cut to static, replaced by a vast, echoing silence that felt deeper than vacuum. When sensation returned, he was no longer standing on black glass stone. He was standing on nothing. An endless plain of pale light stretched in all directions, broken only by a single towering construct ahead. A lattice of geometry so complex it hurt to look at directly. The Sovereign Codex. Not its hardware. Its mind space. HFY Sci-Fi tales rarely take humans inside the brains of empires. But Elias had just been drafted into one. Kalira appeared beside him, not in armor, but in simple ceremonial robes. The version of herself stripped of weapons, authority, and theatrical dominance. This is the arbitration layer, she said quietly. No physical harm can be inflicted here. Only truths. Elias flexed his hands. His wounds were gone. So was the pain. I don't like places where nothing can bleed, he replied. The codex manifested as a shifting cathedral of logic. Columns of equations rose into infinity. Streams of symbolic light flowed like rivers between floating platforms. Challenge state entered adjudication phase. It intoned. Empathic data from both parties required. Kalira stiffened. It's never asked that before. Maybe it's learning, Elias said. The codex turned toward him, not with eyes, but with probability fields that made his thoughts feel loud. Human challenger. Define motivation. 1,000 answers rushed through him. Anger. Loss. Rage. But he spoke only one. I came because my mother suffocated in an unpressurized cargo hold after your tribute fleet seized our colony's life support cores, he said evenly. And the officer who signed that order was promoted for exceeding quota. The light around them dimmed. Kalira inhaled sharply. That convoy was under my seal, she whispered. I never saw the details. Only the output metrics. HFY Sci-Fi tales are full of villains who never see their own atrocities. The codex pulsed. Empathic integration in progress. Kalira staggered, as if struck. Her breath hitched. Her eyes widened with sudden, alien terror. She was feeling it. Not reading reports. Not analyzing metrics. Feeling the vacuum tear through human lungs. Feeling helplessness. Elias watched her knees buckle. Stop, he said instinctively. But the codex did not. Human experience registered, integrating into imperial decision matrix. Kalira collapsed to her hands, gasping. We never feel it, she rasped. We rule through abstraction, through clean numbers. Humans don't get that luxury, Elias said softly. Would this break her? The light stabilized. Kalira pushed herself upright, trembling. I believed supremacy meant distance, she said, that to rule was to rise above consequence. She looked at him, not as Empress to challenger, but as one wounded being to another. And you have just shown me that distance is another word for cruelty. The Codex shifted its architecture. New structures unfolded, ones that did not resemble ancient imperial code. Deviation confirmed as systemic correction, initiating binding oath reinterpretation. Elias felt the plane beneath them ripple. What does that mean? He asked. Kalira closed her eyes. It means the oath is no longer about marriage as spectacle, she said. It is about unity as governance. Challenger has achieved disruptive parity through systemic reformation. Oath condition met. The words echoed across infinity. Oath condition met. Elias staggered backward. You mean I didn't have to kill you at all? Kalira almost laughed, a raw, broken sound. No, you did something far more dangerous. The Codex brightened, activating CO supremacy protocols. The plane of light began folding in on itself, compressing into threads that wound around both of them. Elias felt data pour into his mind, not overwhelming, but clarifying. Star maps, resource flows, trade corridors bleeding worlds dry. This wasn't power. It was responsibility. Kalira met his gaze through the swirling lattice. If this completes, she said, the Empire will recognize you as bound to its throne. Bound how? Her lips curved, not in dominance, but weary irony. In every way that matters. The architecture shuddered. Transfer at 53%. Was he about to become part of the Empire he came to fight? Elias clenched his fists. You don't get to turn my grief into a crown. Kalira's voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear. Then don't be a king, she said. Be the flaw that keeps it honest. The light surged, and the arbitration layer began to collapse around them. When Elias opened his eyes, the Empire was kneeling. He lay on the fractured arena floor, breath ragged, vision swimming, as if he had surfaced from an ocean made of light. The first thing he saw was not the Empress. It was the court, thousands of alien nobles, beings who had never bowed to anything but conquest, were on one knee, their ceremonial crests lowered in synchronized reverence. The sovereign codex had rendered its verdict. Above the arena, the hollow banners no longer bore Kalira's sigil alone. They now displayed a new emblem, the imperial crest split by a thin Terran blue line. Co-supremacy. HFY Sci-Fi tales often end with humanity overthrowing tyrants. This one had just installed a human inside the system. Kalira stood a few paces away, stripped of armor, her neural crown dormant. She looked smaller, not physically, existentially. Rise, she commanded the court. They did not. The Codex spoke again, this time aloud through the Citadel's resonance grid. Imperial protocol updated. Dual sovereignty established. Empathic metrics now required for all strategic decisions. A tremor rippled through the assembly. Empires are not afraid of enemies. They are afraid of constraints. Elias pushed himself upright, joints screaming as the residual pain returned. This isn't what I came for, he muttered. Kalira met his gaze. You came to stop us, she said. You succeeded. Her eyes were haunted. The Codex had not merely granted him authority. It had made her accountable. The first test came immediately. A projection flared above the dais, an automated imperial alert. A border world named Illith Prime was in revolt. Civilian sectors resisting tribute extraction. Old Kalira would have issued orbital suppression without blinking. Now the Codex turned to Elias. CO sovereign input required. Would he condemn strangers to die? Elias stared at the casualty projection scrolling across the air. Efficiency curves that treated lives like depreciation. He shook his head. We halt extraction. Dispatch relief ships. Open negotiations. Gasps tore through the gallery. Kalira hesitated, then said, Codex, comply. The machine paused, then obeyed. For the first time in Imperial history, a human had overridden an empress in real time. The nobles began to murmur, not in outrage, but something far more dangerous. Fear. Hours later, Elias stood alone in a vast chamber overlooking the dying blue star. The Citadel's architecture no longer felt triumphant. It felt fragile. "You don't belong here," he said quietly. Kalira appeared beside him, hands folded behind her back. "No," she agreed, "but neither do I anymore." She watched the stars shed another filament of plasma. The Codex has begun pushing empathic waiting into sectors that have never known restraint. Governors are panicking. "Good," Elias replied. "Let them." She turned to him. "You don't realize what you've done." He did, actually. He had made tyranny inefficient. HFY Sci-Fi tales usually paint humans as warriors, but this story was turning them into something more unsettling. Regulators. A ripple of unease passed through him. "What happens if I refuse this role?" Kalira studied him. "The Codex will not allow abdication without successor binding. You are now a structural component." He laughed bitterly. "So I came to end your empire and became a subroutine." She almost smiled. The doors behind them opened. A delegation of High Lords entered, beings who had commanded fleets capable of sterilizing worlds. They bowed to Elias. "Co-Sovereign Rook." Their speaker said stiffly. "There is concern among the Dominions. Human empathy introduces operational inefficiency." Elias folded his arms. "Funny. You've been calling that collateral for centuries." The Lord bristled. "Our Dominion is built on certainty." "Then rebuild it," Elias replied. Silence. Would they move against him? They didn't, not yet. Instead, the Codex intervened again. Internal instability detected. Dual sovereign bond must be formalized. Kalira closed her eyes. "It's accelerating." "Formalized how?" Elias asked warily. She met his gaze, something like resignation in her posture. The oath was not merely symbolic. It binds co-sovereigns in cognitive and legal union. "You mean?" "Yes," she said softly. "Marriage, in the archaic imperial sense. Shared authority. Shared consequence." The word landed heavier than any blade. HFY sci-fi tales don't usually end in weddings. But this one wasn't about romance. It was about leverage. Elias stared out at the burning star again, realizing the truth with a hollow ache in his chest. He hadn't beaten the Empress. He had become impossible for the Empire to ignore. And now it was reshaping itself around him, whether he wanted it or not. The Empire did not resist Elias. It studied him. Within days of the Co-Supremacy Declaration, the Sovereign Codex began deploying empathic compliance audits across the Dominion. Worlds long bled dry by tribute algorithms suddenly found their quota suspended. Their governors summoned into arbitration loops they could not escape. And every time, the Codex asked the same thing. How does this feel to the human? HFY sci-fi tales rarely show the fallout after the hero wins. This was the part no legend prepared him for. Elias stood inside a newly constructed chamber, the Human Integration Suite. They called it. It was absurd. Walls adjusted to Earth standard gravity, atmospheric composition tuned to Terran norms, even ambient noise calibrated to resemble wind through trees. It felt like a museum exhibit labeled specimen. Human leader. Kalira joined him, her steps softer these days. She no longer wore imperial armor except for ceremonial addresses. The neural crown stayed in a containment field, only activated when Codex interfacing was unavoidable. "You should be resting," she said. "I'm not a relic," Elias replied. "I'm a liability." She considered that. So am I now. A hologram ignited between them. Trade lanes, shifting red as systems destabilized. "You've slowed extraction across 17 sectors," she said. "The aristocracies are hemorrhaging influence. They will not remain passive." "I don't care," Elias replied. "Let them feel what they've inflicted." Kalira's expression darkened. "They won't come at you directly. They will undermine the Codex." That got his attention. "You said it was incorruptible." "I said it was ancient," she corrected. "And ancient systems develop blind faith in precedent." As if summoned by the thought, the Codex pulsed across the chamber walls. Deviation stress threshold approaching. Elias felt a chill. "What does that mean?" Kalira exhaled slowly. "It means the Empire is too used to cruelty. You're not breaking its rules. You're exhausting its tolerance. Was the Codex going to reject him? Days later, the formalization ceremony began. Not in the arena, in the Codex core. They stood together inside a cathedral of living data, the architecture spiraling like a DNA helix around a central singularity of light. Every world, every subject, every war was encoded somewhere in this impossible construct. This was not a wedding. It was a systems merge. Binding sequence initiated, the Codex intoned. Threads of golden code wrapped around Elias and Kalira, linking neural pathways, syncing decision matrices. He felt her fear. She felt his grief. For a moment, the Empire was held together by two broken beings, sharing the same heartbeat. And then the intrusion came. A ripple of static tore through the Codex lattice. Entire sections flickered into red quarantine fields. Kalira gasped. They're attacking the core. Noble houses, desperate to preserve their autonomy, had unleashed forbidden logic viruses. Ancient exploit constructs meant to fracture the Codex's adaptive layer. The singularity pulsed erratically. System integrity compromised. Elias clenched his fists. How do we stop it? Kalira's eyes glowed faintly as she interfaced directly. We don't. Not with weapons. Then with what? She looked at him with sudden, fierce clarity. With memory. The Codex reeled as corrupted sectors collapsed inward. Worlds flickered in and out of the lattice. Error, empathic data overflow. Elias realized the truth in a heartbeat. The Codex has never handled mass suffering directly, he said. It's optimized for abstraction. For distance. Yes, Kalira replied. And you are its exception. Could he weaponize empathy? She took his hands, pulling him closer to the singularity. Show it, she whispered. Not as numbers, as lives. Elias closed his eyes. He didn't offer strategy. He offered memory. The smell of recycled air in a dying habitat. The sound of a mother coughing in the dark. The terror of decompression alarms that never stopped. He poured his life into the Codex. Not data. Experience. The golden threads flared white-hot. The corruption stalled, logic viruses unable to reconcile with non-quantifiable input. The Codex convulsed, then stabilized. Empathic anchor established. Kalira sagged against him, breath shuddering. You didn't just defend it, she said. You changed its language. The lattice reconfigured itself, entire sectors reshaping around empathic waiting. But victory carried a cost. The nobles who had launched the attack were already mobilizing fleets. Elias felt it through the Codex, systems going dark, alliances fracturing. The Empire was no longer quietly afraid. It was openly preparing for civil war. Civil wars do not begin with gunfire. They begin with whispers. Across the Dominion, comnets lit up with encrypted missives. Noble houses who had ruled through bloodline and brutality now spoke the same word in private channels. Human, not as a species, as a threat vector. Elias felt the tremors before the first shot was fired. Through the Codex's empathic layer, unrest manifested as nausea, vertigo, a low-frequency ache behind his eyes. You're feeling the Empire destabilize, Kalira said as she watched him steady himself against a console. That was never meant for any ruler. I never asked for it, he replied. She softened. None of us do. The First Fleet defected within hours. House Varex, ancient masters of the Outer Shard, severed their codex links and declared autonomous sovereignty. Their message was brief and venomous. The throne is compromised. The human influence must be excised. HFY Sci-Fi tales love climactic battles. This one was beginning with a mutiny written in protocol code. Alarms cascaded through the citadel. Tactical overlays filled the air, vectors, probability cones, casualty projections that made Elias's stomach churn. We can't fight them, he said. Every engagement just creates more widows. Kalira didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed on a sector map, where red lights multiplied like an infection. You once asked what happens if you refuse this role, she said quietly. This is the answer. Was the Empire going to collapse around him? The Codex pulsed urgently. Recommendation, deploy suppression armadas. Elias shook his head. No orbital fire. No planetary sieges. Noncompliance will increase casualty projections by 47%. Then lower your projections. He snapped. Find another solution. The machine paused, a heartbeat that felt like eternity. Kalira stepped closer. You are not commanding a fleet, she said. You are arguing with a god. Elias met her eyes. Then it needs to learn how to listen. A new alert flared. A civilian transport had been intercepted by House Varric's patrols. Families, children, refugees fleeing destabilized tribute worlds. They would be used as leverage. Rage coiled in Elias's chest. Patch me into their channel. The noble stared as he bypassed Imperial encryption, like a man tearing through paper. His voice carried across the contested sector. This is Co-Sovereign Rook, he said evenly. Release the transport. Static. Then a smug, distorted reply. You have no authority here. Human. Your empathy is a weakness we intend to cauterize. Elias closed his eyes for a moment. Then he changed tactics. Your fleet's life support systems were calibrated under Codex oversight, he said. 3% oxygen redundancy. Fine margins. Efficient. Silence. I just instructed the Codex to reclassify your sector as humanitarian triage, he continued. That triggers emergency atmospheric buffers across all connected vessels. Kalira's eyes widened. Elias, you now have oxygen surpluses flooding non-civilian ships, he finished calmly. Your crews will experience hyperoxic toxicity in under 6 minutes. Panic erupted over the open channel. You wouldn't. I already did. Would he become what he hated? Moments later, the civilian transport was released. Elias terminated the link, hands trembling. I didn't kill anyone, he said, as much to himself as to Kalira. I just applied pressure. She studied him. You bent the Empire to protect the helpless. That doesn't make it clean. No, she agreed, but it makes it human. The war escalated anyway. House Varrix rallied 3 allied dynasties. Fleets began maneuvering toward the core worlds, not to conquer, to decapitate. Elias felt the approaching storm like a migraine that spanned light years. They'll come for you, Kalira said. Not the throne. You. Then let them, he replied. I won't hide behind your people. She caught his arm. You don't understand. If they sever your neural link to the Codex, the empathic layer collapses, he finished, and the Empire goes back to being a machine that eats worlds. Her grip tightened. I won't lose you. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was fear. They stood together in the heart of an empire tearing itself apart, knowing the next move would define every HFY sci-fi tale ever told about this age. Elias turned toward the tactical hollow. Plot me a course to the Varrix flagship, he said. If they want a symbol, I'll give them one. Kalira stared at him, stunned. You're going to fly into the teeth of their rebellion. Yes, he said, because empires don't change when kings shout orders. He met her gaze, steady despite the chaos roaring through the Codex. They change when someone is willing to stand where the machine breaks. The rebel armada never expected the human to arrive alone. The shuttle Elias piloted was little more than a medical courier retrofitted with Codex uplinks. No weapons, no escort, just a fragile hull slicing through the debris field at the edge of Varrix-controlled space. From the flagship's bridge, House Varrix commanders watched his approach with open disbelief. A decoy, one muttered. No, their matriarch replied, her mandibles tightening. A confession. The docking clamps seized his craft without resistance. Elias felt the Codex humming in his bones as he stepped onto the hangar deck, flanked not by guards, but by silence. The air was heavy with suppressed rage, every rebel soldier staring at the human who had made their empire hesitate. He didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for the fleet-wide calm. You wanted the flaw, he said calmly. I'm here. The matriarch emerged from the shadows, draped in void steel regalia. You infest our Codex with sentiment, she hissed. We will purge you and restore dominion. Elias nodded once. Then do it. Kill me. The hangar stilled. Do you think martyrdom will save your kind? She sneered. No, he replied. I think it will save yours. He closed his eyes. and severed his neural bridge. The empathic layer collapsed instantly. Across the Dominion, governors screamed as the Codex lost its human anchor. Extraction algorithms rebooted. Suppression protocols surged back online. For one terrifying heartbeat, the old empire returned. Then the Codex did something unprecedented. It did not revert. It compensated. Human empathic data remains persistent. It announced across every channel. CO sovereign risk accepted as foundational variable. The matriarch recoiled. Impossible. Elias opened his eyes, blood trickling from his nose. I didn't build a dependency, he said weakly. I taught it a pattern. Kalira's voice thundered through the flagship systems, not as Empress, but as equal. House Varex, she declared. You wanted to excise the human. Instead, you have proven his necessity. Rebel ships flickered on the tactical hollow, hesitation replacing aggression. Their fleets had felt it, the Codex continuing to weigh life even without Elias plugged in. The matriarch faltered. Her soldiers shifted uneasily. You have turned the throne into a conscience, she spat. Elias smiled faintly. Good. Silence stretched. Then slowly, weapons were lowered. The Civil War ended not with a barrage, but with surrender. Days later, the amphitheater reopened, not for spectacle, but reckoning. Elias stood beside Kalira beneath banners, now bearing a third symbol, a simple Terran glyph meaning witness. She faced the assembly, voice steady. The oath has been fulfilled, she said, not through conquest, but through correction. She turned to Elias. Co-Sovereign Rook did not defeat me. He changed what victory means. He took the podium, awkward, human, still bleeding at the edges of an empire. I didn't come to marry a throne, he said quietly. I came because someone had to stand where your machines couldn't feel. Across the stars, people listened. Not nobles. People. This empire will never be clean, he continued, but it will be accountable. To the worlds it governs. To the lives it calculates. The Codex pulsed gently. Empathic governance, confirmed as primary directive. Kalira met his gaze. Something fragile and fierce between them. Not romance. Respect. The human had not become emperor. He had become a mirror. HFY Sci-Fi Tales will tell the story differently. They will say a man challenged an alien empress and won her hand. But the truth is simpler. A human walked into a system that could not feel and taught it how. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who loves HFY Sci-Fi Tales, and subscribe to HFY Soundscape for more stories where humanity refuses to be invisible among the stars.